Working as a developer on Total War is hell. At least, that's my theory. Have you ever wondered why every single Total War title has the exact same problems? To name a few: units blobbing up, AI making awful decisions, and frame rates dropping on your PC that should easily be able to handle it. In this video, we'll dive into the 3 things that make Total War such a nightmare for developers, and why these issues still haven't been fixed. I have 18 years of experience as a software engineer in the field, and the problems Total War face are really similar to issues I've encountered out in the wild. Keep in mind, this video is just a theory based on my experience. I don't work for CA or have any insider access, so everything you hear today, take it with a pinch of salt. I also want to make it clear that I love Total War. It's one of the reasons I want to share my thoughts on how to save it. With that in mind, let's jump in. All developers work with something that we call version control. In practice, this means you have a master codebase which represents your game. When a developer works on a new feature, they branch off this to complete their work and then merge it back in once the feature is considered complete and it becomes part of the final game. Now, consider that a team of developers are working on this. There's multiple branches being created, worked on, and merged back in all the time. There's a little more to it, but this is the basic principle of version control. Now, Empire Total War was the first game for CA's Warscape engine. Think of this as the first master codebase. When CA came to develop the next game, Napoleon Total War, they made a code branch from Empire and started building their new game on top of it. This means they don't have to start from scratch again. They can use Empire as a starting point and save redoing all of the work again. What we have now is 2 master branches, one for each game. So far so good. But while Napoleon was still in production, CA also had started making Shogun 2. But wait, Napoleon isn't finished, so we can't really use that as a foundation for our next game. So instead, we take a new branch from the stable Empire codebase and start on our new game. Immediately we have a problem. Napoleon creates some great new features and fixes a whole bunch of issues that Empire had, but Shogun 2 doesn't get any of these updates because it's in a different branch. As they both branch from Empire, luckily the codebases still have a lot in common. Some hand-picked fixes can be manually brought across. There's a reasonable chance that Shogun 2's codebase is similar enough to Napoleon for this to work. Eventually though, over time the 2 games will drift apart, having less and less in common as they develop. This means that any features or fixes eventually become incompatible with the other. They become 2 different versions as the Empire code gets taken in 2 different directions. This makes sense, as both teams are making a game with very different objectives in mind. Phew, that took a bit of work to understand. It's gonna get a little bit more complicated, but I promise we're nearly there. So it gets worse. Next up, Rome 2 goes into production by branching from Napoleon as a starting point. It inherits all the features and fixes that Napoleon had, but unfortunately, we've now branched so far away from Shogun 2 that any new cool features or fixes from that game are totally incompatible with Rome 2 because the code bases are now so different. Any features from Shogun effectively have to be remade from scratch, which is time consuming. Often, there's no time available to redo every single fix, so some issues that were solved in Shogun 2 reappear in the next game. So Rome 2 makes it to completion, and then we branch again from Rome 2 to create Attila. While Attila is in production, CA begin working on Warhammer by branching from Rome 2 once again. Thrones of Britannia branches from Attila, 3 Kingdoms and Warhammer 2 both branch from Warhammer. At this point, CA begin to see a problem. Their games are drifting apart and becoming radically different from one another. The developer of Thrones of Britannia has no clue how Warhammer works and vice versa because the code has been drifting apart for years. Problems they solve in one can't be copied to the other. It's a bit of a mess. A decision is made to streamline development. They picked one branch and discontinued all the other ones to try and consolidate their dev resources. But which one did they pick? Warhammer 2. This decision was effectively the end of true historical Total War. Warhammer 2 had all the stuff it didn't need stripped out of it. Proper sieges, naval battles, custom unit animations to name a few. This is why we've lost all the cool historical features, and why fans are upset that even the historical games play like Fantasy Warhammer these days. It's because they literally spawned from the Warhammer codebase. Troy and Pharaoh feel less feature-rich because all the stuff you liked from Shogun 2, Attila, Thrones of Britannia branches don't exist in the codebase anymore. Effectively, anything after Rome 2 never made its way into these new games. Hence, these titles have reintroduced old features as though they are new. Because they literally had to be remade from scratch. In Creative Assembly's eyes, they are new. Whereas to us, the gamers, they're just old features making a comeback. To recap, I'm hoping this helps everyone understand the decisions that Creative Assembly made that led to the fan favourite historical features being axed. Whether this was a good or a bad decision, I'll leave it up to you, it depends on your preference. Let's focus on a slightly easier topic next. Every game since Empire has been made using their Warscape engine. CA have never done a full engine rewrite since. In practice, this means that their latest game, Pharaoh, will still contain much of the underlying foundations from Empire, which is now 15 years old. Certainly, CA can fix issues with the foundations, and I'm sure they have. Pharaoh certainly feels smoother than its predecessors, but they can't totally rethink or restructure them. Too much of the game codebase relies on them being in a very specific way. Imagine building a 100-floor skyscraper, then deciding you wanted to change the ground floor. At best, you could give it a makeover, but you can't change the foundations once the building's already there. In game development, it would be faster to write a whole new engine than to try to turn the Warscape engine into something new. It's this exact reason why Total War can't escape common issues like the unit blobbing and frame rate drops. These problems exist in the foundation and just can't be changed. I guarantee you, the developers are desperate to solve these problems, but it's not their decision to make, which leads us nicely into the third and final topic. Let's face it, a business has to make money to survive. It's a reality of the world we live in. The new engine sounds like the holy grail of solutions, but is it feasible to spend 5 to 10 years working on something that won't see a return on its investment for such a long time? Let's be honest, making a new engine is costly and high risk. Imagine spending all that time and money making a new engine only for the end result to fail. It could be a business-ending decision if it goes wrong. It's a really tough sell convincing shareholders that it's going to take 10 years before they start seeing any benefit, and that's assuming the project even goes well. A much easier and safe strategy is to reuse your tried and tested engine and branch from it to make another new game. The results are more guaranteed, and you can be pretty accurate with your estimates. That's exactly the decision making that left us with Troy and Pharaoh. CA is acutely aware of the engine problems, but they chose to play it safe. If you were in CA's shoes, wouldn't you have made the same decision? I totally understand their thinking. It's actually very rational when you think about it. But with hindsight, they would have been much better off spending their resources on building the next Total War engine. In all honesty, Troy and Pharaoh weren't terrible titles. In many ways, they were almost as good as some of the past historical titles. But the problem is that they don't push things forwards. It's the same game we've played countless times. I personally haven't purchased Pharaoh because it plays and feels just like every other Total War game I already own. There's nothing new about it. Creative Assembly. If you made the right decision back in 2019 after 3 Kingdoms to build a new engine, you could have been ready to announce a new, groundbreaking game to thunderous applause. Instead, we got Troy and Pharaoh. But, you know, I get that hindsight's a beautiful thing. They made the decision they thought was right. It turns out maybe it wasn't as good as they thought. So what's the solution? I, for one, am a massive advocate for CA retiring their Warscape engine in favour of building a new one from scratch. Warscape was incredible for its time, but it just doesn't compete with modern games. So my message to Creative Assembly is this: it's time. There's a host of exciting new development tools and techniques out there. Make use of them and get that new engine into development before it's too late. You have an opportunity now to solve all the problems that have plagued Total War for years. It will be costly and it will take time, but I promise it will be worth it. Without a new engine, you're sleepwalking into a slow death for your company. Each new title will be less and less popular than the one before, until there's nothing left. At the time of making this video, I hope that you've already started. I often wonder whether the reason we haven't seen any details on Empire or Medieval sequels is due to Warscape being incapable of satisfying the hype around these titles. And you're right. While this is speculation, I believe you're holding them back because you already know Warscape isn't capable of fulfilling the vision for these games. If that's true, why be so secretive? The fans will applaud you for announcing a new engine is in development, even if it's years away from completion. It will give us, the fans, the reassurance we need to continue believing in you as a company and support you for years to come. In summary, get that new engine into production for your own survival. Sincerely, a massive Total War fan.